All right, guys, in this video, I'm going to go through an overview of functions. The title of Unit 2 is Intro to Functions, so we'll be talking about three things, and I'll have videos in each section of this unit. But just so you have some general knowledge and understand some vocabulary of the functions we'll be looking at, I'm going to go through a couple things here. So, in general, when you see a function written in Algebra 1, it will be written as this. That's what we would call that f of x, right? And we would call that function notation, okay? And that'll be by itself, generally on the left side of the equal sign. All right, on the other side will be your actual function. So this is just naming the function. This is just telling the reader f stands for this is a function, x means that's going to be the variable. So we could do a simple one. I'm just going to make this up. Let's say 4x plus 2. And we'll see a lot more complex functions than this, but it's day one, so keeping it basic. All right, so f of x equals 4x plus 2. What we could do with this function is, if we wanted to, for any specified number, for any specified amount being x, we could plug in that number and get an answer, right? So if somebody wanted us to evaluate the function for a number 2, we could plug in 2 and tell them what it is. We could evaluate it for the number 10, plug in 10, do the math, and find out what it is, right? So what you see is the difference here in functions and equations is you can have a number of different answers when you evaluate functions, right? An important thing to write down here, okay, would be that you do not solve a function, you evaluate it. Okay, so that's the big difference between functions and equations. You don't solve functions, you evaluate them. All right, like I just said, we can't solve for x. It's not the point. The point is to plug in things for x. And throughout this three-part unit, you will learn how to do that pretty quickly. All right. So hopefully you got that written down somewhere. Okay, I'll give you a second. If you haven't, you don't solve a function, you evaluate it. Make sure you have that written down somewhere. And delete. Okay, so let's talk about vocabulary. Actually, one more thing before we do. This f of x right here, okay, we could also call that y. I could write the exact same function instead of f of x and write y equals 4x plus 2. Now this looks like something you've learned in the past. Now this looks like slope, right? Well, I told you before that slope winds up being a subject called linear functions in this class. And that right there is the connection. Kind of make a two-sided arrow. This is the connection as to how that works. F of x and y are the same thing. F of x and y are the same thing, right? So let's talk about that, right? I'm gonna make a little T-chart here for our vocabulary. Different names for x and y because there's quite a few. Okay. And I'll change colors. All right. So the first name you need to know for x is input. Okay, and you can write this down, or you can screenshot it if you know how to do that. Do that at the end. And you can probably figure out we call x an input because it's something that we plug in, right? We input, as I just said, numbers for the x over here. So if x is the input, the answer that we get, right, when we do the math, the answer that we get would be over here in the y, and we call that the output. I'm sure some of you have heard these terms before. if you remember anything from 8th grade math. All right, so that's the first two. That's the first two different names that we give the x and the y, input and output. All right, we're going to be talking about domain and range pretty quick. And domain is a name for all the possible x values. All right, so domain is talking about x values, range is talking about y values. Range. All right. And those are the big ones. All right, those are the big ones. Okay. And under, I put one more underneath y. I write f of x, because as I said earlier, f of x really is the same thing as y. All right. So there you go, guys. There's your brief overview of functions.